Guten Morgen, guten Tag, guten Abend. Machen wir jetzt Kapitel 20.1. Let's do Kapitel 20.1, which is zu plus infinitive. You've probably noticed these constructions hanging around in sentences you've translated already, but it's good to go over them to make sure you know exactly what's going on with these types of sentences. So zu plus infinitive, these are sometimes called infinitive phrases. So, es macht mir Spaß, Yoga zu machen, which is it's fun for me to do yoga. So es macht mir Spaß means it's fun for me, and then Yoga zu machen is just to do yoga. But machen already means to do, right? When you translate machen, like with a modal verb, you would say ich möchte Yoga machen without the zu. So machen already means to do, but there are certain situations where the zu is added to the infinitive, so it's still translated as to do, but you've added zu as well. But machen already means to do. So, hast du Lust, heute Abend ins Kino zu gehen? Are you in the mood to go to the movies tonight? So, hast du Lust? Are you in the mood? And then zu gehen would be the to go. And the gehen already means to go, but the zu has been added because of the way this is constructed. And then to the movies tonight, heute Abend ins Kino. So you can see that zu infinitive phrase comes at the very end, or the verb, the infinitive comes at the very end of the whole phrase. Then we have, hast du Zeit, mich zu besuchen? Do you have time to visit me? So hast du Zeit, do you have time? And then to visit me with besuchen being at the end. So it's like, do you have time, me to visit? Maybe sounds a little bit like Yoda, but the infinitive has to be at the end of these infinitive phrases. So infinitive phrases are constructed zu plus infinitive. Zu at the beginning, zu right before the infinitive, and then depending on what else you want to add, any details you want to add, those will come before. So these verbs are followed by an infinitive phrase. So these verbs are often followed by infinitive phrase. When you see these verbs, you can watch out for a likely infinitive phrase coming. Vergessen, to forget. Like, I forgot to wash my clothes, or whatever it is. Ich habe vergessen, meine Klamotten zu waschen, or whatever it is. Versuchen, to try. Lust haben, to be in the mood. So it's like, I tried to do this, or I'm in the mood to do this. Zeit haben, to have time. Versprechen, to promise. I promised to do this. That would be the to do in a zu infinitive. And then vorhaben, to plan. Ich habe vor, meine Hausaufgaben zu machen. I am planning to do my homework. And then Spaß machen, to be fun. It is fun to do something. Yeah. So then we have some examples. Ich habe versprochen, Tim zum Flughafen zu fahren. I promised to drive Tim to the airport. So you see that to drive is the equivalent of zu fahren in this case, and it is actually at the very end. The infinitive phrase starts with the comma. In most cases, there's a comma. If it's really short, then there's no comma. But if it's only the verb and you're not adding anything else, then there's no comma. But otherwise, there should be a comma. So it helps you recognize that the infinitive phrase is coming. Yeah, so I promised to drive Tim to the airport. Ich habe versprochen, I promised. And then, so it's like, I promised Tim to the airport to drive. Yeah, I promised Tim to the airport to drive. But of course, in English, we don't put that verb at the end. We put it right next to the other verb. Zu plus infinitive stands at the end of the sentence, yes. At the end of the clause, really, but often the end of the sentence. So then we have some infinitive phrases. Hast du Lust zu schlafen? Are you in the mood to sleep? Hast du Zeit, mich zu besuchen? Do you have time to visit me? Hast du Zeit, mich zu besuchen? Or literally, it would be, do you have time, me to visit? Which, of course, is more like Yoda than standard English. If the infinitive phrase consists solely of zu in the infinitive, or if we're only adding a verb, we're not adding a bunch of other adverbs or objects or anything, then you don't need a comma. So because it's so short, there's no comma there. So, hast du Lust zu schlafen? Are you in the mood to sleep, right? So it's just zu schlafen. Are you in the mood to sleep? So we haven't added anything else, so there's no comma there. But if any other elements are added to the phrase, then the phrase is set off by a comma at the beginning. Hast du Zeit, Komma, mich zu besuchen. So we've added mich, which is a direct object. So because of that, we're going to set it off. And then often these can get a lot longer, so you can add a bunch of things. So let's try a few, let's make sure we understand the difference between an infinitive phrase and then a modal verb, because they do look quite similar. So a modal verb construction does not use zu. Remember the modal verbs where you say, kannst du ins Kino gehen? Du kannst ins Kino gehen. So there's no zu anywhere in this sentence. I mean, it could be a preposition if you want to use preposition. Zu is also a preposition, right? I think that's also important to note. You can say like, ich gehe zu, whatever. Ich gehe zu Disneyland, right? So, of course, zu means to in some cases. Ich gehe zum Supermarkt. But this zu is different. It just goes along with the infinitive to make this grammatical construction. So a modal verb does not do that. It just has the modal verb plus the infinitive, no zu. So, kannst du ins Kino gehen? It's not like kannst du ins Kino zu gehen. There's no zu there. So, möchtest du ins Kino gehen? Would you like to go to the movie theater? Darfst du ins Kino gehen? Willst du ins Kino gehen? Sollst du ins Kino gehen? No zu involved with the modal verbs. But the zu infinitive is a different construction, and it goes with other verbs besides modal verbs, right? So, hast du Lust? Macht es dir Spaß? Versuchst du? These are all sorts of other verbs that aren't modal verbs. And they, when you want to combine, like add another verb to this situation, then the zu is used to sort of add the other verb at the end. Macht es dir Spaß, ins Kino zu gehen? Is it fun for you to go to the movies? Hast du Lust, ins Kino zu gehen? Are you in the mood to go to the movies? Hast du Zeit, ins Kino zu gehen? Do you have time to go to the movies? Hast du vor, ins Kino zu gehen? Are you planning to go to the movies? Versuchst du, ins Kino zu gehen? Are you trying to go to the movies? So all of these have a zu plus the infinitive at the end. With separable prefix verbs, zu is inserted between the prefix and the verb. So hopefully you remember this separable prefix verbs to some extent. So this umzuziehen actually comes from umziehen. So the regular infinitive form of the verb is umziehen, which means to move residence, not just to move physically, but to move residence, umziehen. So umziehen, without the zu, that would be your normal infinitive that you would find in the dictionary. But now we're going to, hast du vor, hast du wirklich vor, that's the sort of phrase that would if you wanted to add planning, if you want to add to move to planning, then the way you do it is by doing a zu infinitive. And instead of adding the zu as a separate word first, like all those other ones, the zu is actually going to go in between the prefix and the infinitive. So, hast du wirklich vor, bald umzuziehen? Are you really planning to move soon? If a phrase ends with more than one infinitive, sometimes we can have a double infinitive, right? The zu precedes the last one. So, hast du Zeit, dieses Wochenende mit uns campen zu gehen? So it's usually like going swimming, going jogging, going camping, all of those with the gehen, going shopping. You get a double infinitive with that quite often. And then if you want that kind of double infinitive to happen, then you just say the first one and then the zu right before the last one. Do you have time to go camping with us this weekend? Hast du Zeit, dieses Wochenende mit uns campen zu gehen? And then we have some infinitive phrases are best translated into English using ing form of the verb. You could say, for example, hast du Lust, einen Kuchen zu backen? Which is, do you feel like baking a cake? Because hast du Lust, do you feel like, are you in the mood? So depending on how you translate hast du Lust, are you in the mood to bake a cake? But hast du Lust also means, do you feel like? It's another good translation of hast du Lust. So if you say, do you feel like, and then you say to bake a cake, that doesn't really sound good. Do you feel like to bake a cake? In this, sometimes you can just change that into ing. Do you feel like baking a cake? Yeah, hast du Lust, einen Kuchen zu backen? Of course, you can say, are you in the mood to bake a cake as well? Or, this is my super literal, not pretty translation. Lust means desire, right? So, do you have desire a cake to bake? Which is the Yoda version, yeah. And then, so then we have infinitives with zu. So, we learned about some dependent infinitives used with modals, and the verbs hören, sehen, lassen, and werden. Those are just combinations of verbs, how you could get multiple verbs working together to create one meaning, right? So another verb combination is formed using prepositional infinitives preceded by zu. So zu, they occur with active infinitives. So, for example, zu lesen, zu fahren, and then past infinitives, gelesen zu haben, gefahren zu sein. Yeah. So you can see that's the past participle, and then it's a past participle plus the helping verb. So the haben or sein, see how this is in the perfect, the past tense. And so in that case, you would want to have the helping verb as the infinitive, and then you just do the past participle first, yeah. And then we can do passives with it as well. So passives consist of werden, conjugated in whatever tense you want, plus the past participle. So you can do the werden is like the helping verb, so that would go last, and then preceded by the past participle. So it would be like to be read, right? That's past participle, or that's a passive. So to be read, right? It is like to have read or to have driven, and then to be read, to be driven away, kind of, right? And then past passive infinitives, of course, you can do the pasts and the passive at the same time, because the passive can be in any tense. So gelesen worden zu sein, which would be to have been read, and then gefahren worden zu sein, which would be to have been driven away. Yeah. So they complete a number of German verbs, a few of which are, here's some more verbs that typically can introduce an infinitive phrase. Anfangen, which of course is separable, and then beginnen, aufhören. So it's like, I started to do this, I began to do this. Aufhören, to stop or to cease, I stopped to do this or I stopped doing this. Brauchen, to need, yeah, so I need to do this. And then scheinen, to appear, versprechen, we had already. Verstehen, yeah, I understand, and then you can add a bunch of stuff to that one as well, and versuchen, to try. So, es hat angefangen zu regnen, it started to rain. So, you just do whatever you want to say. Es hat angefangen, it started, and then when you want to start your infinitive phrase, you just do the zu plus the infinitive, and this one's simple, it doesn't, it's only the verb, it doesn't have a bunch of other stuff, just the verb, so we don't need a comma. Jetzt beginnt es zu schneien, schneien, to snow. So now begins it to snow, now it is beginning to snow. Es hat aufgehört zu regnen, so it stopped raining. Yeah, so it stopped, es hat aufgehört in the perfect. And then, yeah, so sometimes the ing is the way you have to translate it, because if it's it stopped to rain, that's not so good. It stopped raining, much better. Für diesen Kurs brauchst du das Buch nicht gelesen zu haben. For this course, you don't need to have read the book. Yeah, so this is an example of how you can do the whole infinitive phrase is basically in the perfect. It's in the past, even though it's not really conjugated in that sense. It's still an infinitive, but it's using the components that you would normally use for the perfect. For the perfect, you need haben or sein as the helping verb, and then the past participle. And usually you conjugate haben. But since we're just in an infinitive phrase, we're not going to conjugate it, but we're still using those components that you would make the perfect with. So it's still in the past tense in a certain sense. Yeah. For this course, you don't need to have read. So gelesen zu haben, to have read that book. Der Professor scheint diese Woche nicht in seinem Büro zu sein. The professor does not appear to be in his office this week. Yeah, scheint diese Woche nicht in seinem Büro, so zu sein, to be. And then, scheint schon nach Deutschland gefahren zu sein. He seems to have gone to Germany. Yeah, or he seems to have driven or ridden, or just have gone is fine as well. He seems to have gone. Gefahren zu sein. So fahren always uses the sein as its helping verb in the perfect. So that's why it's just sein here, but it's not conjugated. It's because it's still an infinitive. Hat versprochen, hier zu sein. He promised to be here. So he has promised here to be. He promised to be here. Sie versteht es, schnell gute Bücher zu schreiben. She understands how to write good books rapidly. Yeah. So, yeah, in this case, the how isn't really represented in the German anywhere. It's like she understands it to write good books rapidly. So it's like she understands to do it, and then in the English we need the how. That's the most natural way to say it in English. So that's kind of a special case, but the how it's implied, but it's really not there in the German. Yeah. So they stand at the end of the clause, and in English they must be translated immediately after the verb upon which they depend. Yeah. So all of these, the verb on which they depend is like the first verb, right? Angefangen, aufgehört, brauchst, all of these verbs that introduce it. In English, you have to like need to have or appear to be. So in English, they all have to be together. But in German, there's almost always some space between them, unless there's no objects or anything. This one, yeah, I mean, this one right here, there's no space. It's just the verb and then the infinitive phrase, but most of the time there's something in between. Okay, so we have extended objects, adverbs, we have all the sorts of things that can be added in there, right? But it cannot have a subject. So we saw all these things, right? You can add other verbs to make compound verbs. You can add, like here's an adverb. You can add prepositional phrases. You can add all sorts of things, but you're not going to add a subject because the subject is already. It sort of the subject has to be the previous subject. It doesn't. Doesn't really work to add in a new subject, or otherwise you'd use a new clause, right? So they're often set off by commas. The general rule is what I told you. If it's longer than just the two words, the zu finden or whatever it is, then you use the comma. But people this is one of those rules that I feel like is changing. And so people are using that comma less and less, but technically you're supposed to use it. But you will see it without. It says so this one, they can be, but are not always set off by commas. But most of the time, if it's a longer one, it will have a comma. But you will find it without sometimes. So that's just one of those, languages are living beings and they change over time. So I think that's one of those things that's changing at the moment. Columbus versuchte, einen neuen Weg nach Indien zu finden. So Columbus tried, and then in English we do not have a comma there. Columbus tried, comma, to find. That would be totally wrong in English, right? But German has different comma rules than English. So, of course, there's a comma there. Tried, and then, so when you translate, you see this comma, and then you think, versuchen. Oh, that sometimes signals an infinitive phrase. So I'm going to go to the end of the next clause to find my other verb. So when you translate, you have to say, Columbus tried, and then go pick up the other verb, and then put it back next to the first verb, and then keep translating the rest. So Columbus tried to find a new route to India. Als in der neuen Welt ankam, glaubte Indien entdeckt zu haben. So as he arrived in the new world, or when he arrived in the new world, this is uncommon, right? But it's at the end of a dependent clause, so that's why it's been kicked to the end. Also, when you have a separable prefix verb that's been kicked to the end, the prefix is attached. And then glaubte he believed, Indien entdeckt zu haben. So it's like, to have discovered India. So discovered is also in a past participle in English. So entdeckt, past participle, discovered, past participle. So but their translation is a little looser here. So it says he believed to have discovered India, which I think sounds fine, but also he believed he had discovered India. So it's a little bit different, but it still conveys the same idea, and it sounds fine. And then, so you see how the subject has to be the same as the first one. You couldn't just add something else, so you can't ever have a subject within that, within that infinitive phrase. Das vorliegende Buch ist ein Versuch, die Entwicklung der Außenpolitik der Vereinigten Staaten darzustellen. The book under consideration, that's vorliegend is like the one laying here in front of you. The laying in front of you book, as in the book under consideration. So the book we're talking about, vorliegend, the book under consideration, is an attempt, ist ein Versuch. So versuchen means to try or to attempt. And so here's the noun form, is an attempt, noun. And then we've got a comma here. And then we're going to have, this whole thing is an infinitive phrase. And so we've got to go to the end to see what the verb is going to be. Because the verb needs to come at the beginning of the infinitive phrase in English, but comes at the end of the infinitive phrase in German. So darzustellen, to show us up. Sometimes it's like to demonstrate or to represent. Mostly to represent, I would say, for darstellen, but to show is also very similar and is a fine translation. So an attempt to show the development. So darzustellen has been like moved up here when you translate. To show the development of the foreign policy of the United States. Yeah, so everything else stays in the same order in this case. It's just that darzustellen has been moved to show. When the infinitive, when used with the infinitive stem of a separable prefix verb, darstellen, yeah, zu stands between the prefix and the simple verb. So we had an example not too long ago that was like umzuziehen. Yeah. So umziehen is to move, and then zuziehen, you put that in between there. And then that is this one, darstellen. Da is the separable prefix, and stellen is the normal part of the verb, the simple verb. So zu has been inserted between da and stellen. And of course, if you see darzustellen in the text and you're trying to figure out what that means, it might be confusing because it looks like an infinitive, except for it's been changed. It's added a syllable, so that might be hard to look up in the dictionary. So it's important to understand the infinitive phrase phenomenon, because then you can think, oh, I bet this is an infinitive phrase, which means that the zu is not really part of the word. The zu has been added because of this construction. So you take out the zu and you get darstellen, which is the verb you'll find in the dictionary, to show or to represent. Yeah. So we have darstellen, of course, which we were just talking about. That's the dar is the separable prefix. Stellen is like the regular part of the verb. Zu stands between, so you leave out zu when you look it up in the dictionary. And then we have infinitive phrases may contain modifying clauses or phrases set off by commas that separate the infinitive from the rest of the clause. Remember that the infinitive, nonetheless, must be translated immediately after the main verb. Yeah, so in English, we want to have our, we want to have it first in the phrase, not last in the phrase, right? So this is the same sentence. We've just moved it way earlier. Darzustellen is just been moved way up here, right after that first part of the sentence. Yeah. And then we have prepositional infinitives with ohne, anstatt. So these are similar to, they're not exactly, these are slightly different types of phrases, but they work in a similar way, but this is sort of a new set of phrases. So zu is related to zu. It works a lot like the zu infinitive phrases we were just talking about, except for it takes it to the next level and it has a slightly different meaning. So infinitive phrases introduced by create purpose, consequence, or effect of the action. So it means in order to, right? So we can go back to some of these examples, like es hat angefangen zu regnen. It started to rain, right? You just translate it as to rain. Imagine if you translated it as it started in order to rain. Well, that doesn't make sense at all. That's not what we're trying to say. It's in order to. There's no causal in order to. There's no like purpose. It started to rain. It's not it started in order to rain. So whenever you want to say in order to rain, in order to, that's the zu, not just the zu by itself. So the zu by itself, if you put in order to in English, it sounds weird. But if the in order to makes sense in English, if the relationship is there with the in order to, with the purpose, then it's zu and not just zu. So, but in English we would sometimes leave in order to out, even if we sort of mean the in order to is there, right? So I'll show you in some examples where it could be there or not, but the meaning is still there. So, der Herzog schickte Soldaten nach Amerika, seine Schatzkammer mit Geld zu füllen. The Duke sent his soldiers to America in order to fill his coffers with money. So imagine this English sentence. The Duke sent his soldiers to America to fill his coffers with money. You could leave out the in order. It could be in order to or just to fill. So in English, we have that option, either in order to fill or just to fill, and it still makes sense either way. But in German, if that meaning of in order to is there, it really has to have the So the way to test it out is to say, if you have one that's just the infinitive, like to fill in English, and you want to know whether you need to use zu or just zu, replace it with in order to. And if in order to at all makes sense, then it has to be zu. But if in order to messes up the meaning, then just zu. Okay, so der Herzog schickte Soldaten nach Amerika. That's the Duke sent his soldiers to America. And then zu, those two go together, zu. So you start out the infinitive phrase at the very beginning with which you wouldn't do if it were just the zu, right? You would just start with whatever else you want to say in the sentence. So starts the phrase, seine Schatzkammer mit Geld, and then zu füllen. So very much like the previous ones we were doing, you have the zu and then the infinitive last, but the difference is that is now in the very beginning of the infinitive phrase. Yes. Lady Milford gab das Geschenk zurück, dem Herzog zu zeigen, dass sie seine Handlung ablehnte. Lady Milford returned the present in order to show. Zu zeigen, in order to show. So in English, can be translated as like in order, I guess. And then zu zeigen, to show. And then, of course, they have to all be together. And then whatever else is happening in the phrase, to show the Duke, it's just the Duke. That's all that's left in the infinitive phrase. And then this is, dass sie seine Handlung ablehnte is a whole nother dependent clause. We're just entering into another clause. Yeah. So of course, zu infinitive is at the end of the sentence if that's the end of the sentence, but it's really at the end of the clause because sometimes you want to put a new clause in there. So end of the clause. Die Studenten haben Schillers Drama gelesen. So all of these, this is describing the plot of Kapitel und Liebe, which is a drama by Schiller. They like to, sometimes in this book, they like to describe a work of literature that without telling you what it is. So if you recognize it, then you feel smart. This is Schiller's Kapitel und Liebe, which is sometimes translated as intrigue and love. And this is part of the plot. Of course, it's a historical, most of Schiller's plays have a historical basis, right? Neue Einsichten in die Geschichte dieser Zeit zu gewinnen. So the students read Schiller's drama in order to gain new insights into the history of this period. So imagine if we left out the in order in English. The students read Schiller's drama to gain new insights into the history of the period. It sounds fine with both in order to or just the two, right? But since this is like the purpose, why did they read it? In order to. Since that purpose meaning is there, then it's and zu. So when you translate, you just translate the first part like normal. The students read Schiller's drama. The students have Schiller's drama read, which is really, students have read or just read Schiller's drama. And then we want to translate our infinitive phrase. We see so we know that it's going to start with in order to. And then we need to go to the very end to grab our other verb that we're going to put back to the front of the infinitive phrase. To gain. And then we just translate everything else that we have left. Neue Einsichten in die Geschichte dieser Zeit. New insights into the history of this time. Yeah. Okay. Then we have some similar type phrases. Ohne zu, without doing something, or anstatt, or just statt zu, instead of doing something. So we can also, in a similar way, instead of introducing with we can introduce with ohne. Ohne, and then the infinitive phrase at the end that you might expect. So, ohne zu, you can say without doing that, right? Die Wissenschaftler suchten das Gen, das blind macht. ohne genau zu wissen, was sie suchten. The scientists sought the gene that causes blindness without knowing exactly what they were seeking. So ohne genau zu wissen, without exactly, it's like without exactly knowing. But if you tried to make it as like to know, it would be without exactly to know, which doesn't sound right in English. So that's the ing is the right way to translate when we have ohne plus a infinitive phrase. And then der Arzt verließ das Krankenhaus, ohne den Patienten besucht zu haben. So without having visited. So you can also do it in the past tense, right? So in the past tense, you're going to do the past participle plus the to plus the infinitive. Ohne den Patienten besucht zu haben, without having visited the patient. Yeah. Okay, and then here's some with statt and anstatt. It's statt and anstatt mean exactly the same thing, so don't worry about statt or anstatt. They both just mean instead, and then just like the previous one, we're going to translate it with ing instead of with to plus the verb, right? So, die Arterie, this word is horrible, Artillerie musste in England bleiben, anstatt in Frankreich eingesetzt zu werden. The artillery, I also find hard to pronounce in English, had to remain in England instead of being deployed in France. So anstatt, instead of, anstatt in Frankreich, and then we're that's going to be the end because we're going to grab these verbs and put them earlier. So being deployed, what we have here is werden and a past participle, and werden plus past participle makes the passive. So, and we're in the present tense because werden's in the present tense. We have instead of being, so the werden is kind of, it's making the passive, so it's the equivalent of being, and then eingesetzt is the past participle, right? So instead of being deployed in France. And then statt ins Kino zu gehen, bin ich zu Hause geblieben. Instead of going to the movie theater, I stayed home. This one's simpler because it's just a normal verb, and it's in the present. So imagine if you tried to make this, zu gehen looks like to go, right? So imagine if you tried to stick with the to go in English, it would be instead of to go to the movie theater, which is not right. It's because the way that instead of works in English, you just can't do that. So instead of going is, of course, the way to do it. Instead of going, statt ins Kino zu gehen. Okay, so now we have an exercise that has little dialogues for you to translate, and they contain infinitive phrases for you to translate. So viel Spaß, have lots of fun with those, and I'll see you in the next video. Wir sehen uns im nächsten Video. Tschüss, bis bald.